A thin trail of tears ran down Lucia's cheek, mingling with the faded stains on her faded blue uniform. In the dimly lit break room, she slumped into a metal chair, her hands trembling inside worn yellow gloves. Outside, the city of glass and steel pulsed with ambition. Inside, a single woman's quiet heartbreak threatened to shatter the silent order of an empire. "Why do they treat me like I'm invisible?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice breaking beneath the weight of years spent swallowing humiliation. Behind the door, unseen, stood Javier Saldivar, the millionaire whose name gleamed across glass towers, now frozen by the sound of someone else's pain. For the first time in years, he hesitated. This wasn't a challenge he could solve with money or strategy. As Lucia's shoulders shook, Javier felt an unfamiliar ache. Guilt, sharp and cold, slicing through the detachment that had fueled his success. Tonight, the lines between master and servant, power and powerlessness, blurred with every sob. How many moments like this had he ignored, protected by status and indifference? And what would happen if he finally chose to see? The next words would redefine both their lives. But in that suspended second, before comfort, before confrontation, a single question echoed. When dignity is stripped away, what does it truly mean to be seen? Have you ever felt invisible in a world that looks right through you? Or witnessed a single encounter that changed the course of someone's, and your own, life forever? Share your stories below. Your voice might just be the next spark in this unfolding journey. The break room was always Lucia's refuge, a quiet, fluorescent-lit limbo suspended between floors of invisible labor and echoing corridors. But that night, it was a sanctuary breached by grief too heavy to hide. She collapsed into a chair, shoulders hunched over trembling hands clad in yellow gloves still fragrant with bleach, as humiliation clawed its way out of her chest in silent sobs. The stain of fresh coffee on her faded turquoise uniform was nothing compared to the scald left by Ruiz's words and the laughter of men in pristine suits. How many years had she survived by turning pain into silence? 5 years, swallowing pride, numbing herself to indifference and sly jokes, to long walks in the rain and stinging reprimands over standards no one cared if she met. 5 years learning that no matter how hard she worked, she would remain unseen, a ghost drifting between office doors, cleaning up after other people's lives. Yet tonight something inside her cracked. Betrayal crept in, not just from Ruiz's cruelty, but from the world itself. A world that demanded her presence only to erase her existence. For the first time, she murmured her secret fear aloud, "Why do they treat me like I'm invisible?" Her voice quivered, laced with exhaustion and a rawness she could no longer hide. As the words hung in the air, the break room door creaked open. Javier Saldivar, owner of the empire whose name gleamed outside on mirrored glass, had come simply seeking a late-night coffee. He never stayed late. He never crossed into service corridors. But tonight, the sound of Lucia's pain rooted him to the threshold. Time suspended. On the other side of that humble partition, the calculated certainties of Javier's world slipped away. He watched Lucia, her dignity in shambles, her composure melting in liquid grief, and something unnameable twisted within him. Guilt, cold and unfamiliar, gnawed through his instinct to command and fix. He longed to retreat behind his armor of power, but found himself hypnotized by the sight of a human wound he had never truly seen. A storm brewed inside them both, one of anger, shame, and undeniable empathy. For Lucia, it was the bitter collision of self-worth and systemic disregard. For Javier, it was an awakening, a stinging realization that his empire of stats and contracts was held aloft by people he'd never bothered to know. He entered, voice tight but gentle, and their eyes finally met. Not as boss and employee, not as symbol and servant, but as two souls stranded in opposing worlds that, for a moment, overlapped. Lucia recoiled, bracing herself for judgment or dismissal. Instead, Javier asked, "Are you all right?" Such a simple question, yet it fractured the last of Lucia's defenses. She forced herself to answer, trembling but honest, her agony surfacing in every syllable. Javier listened, stunned by the realization that the cruelty she suffered was not an accident. It was a consequence of the indifference he'd allowed, a culture he had built. A complex web of emotions ran beneath Lucia's ragged composure, anger at her powerlessness, shame in her vulnerability, but also a stubborn flicker of pride that refused to let her break completely. When Javier apologized, truly apologized, it was not just corporate contrition, it was a profound, personal recognition of her worth. For Lucia, it was the first time in years that someone looked at her without judgment. For Javier, it was the first time he saw the person behind the uniform. A new silence settled, charged not with awkwardness, but with something closer to respect, a mutual ache, and perhaps, the first tremor of change. With a gentle promise to make things right, Javier departed, haunted not by late-night business but by the haunted gaze of a woman brought to her knees by a world that should have protected her. Lucia remained alone for a long moment, letting his words settle into the cracks left by years of invisibility. She left the break room changed, aching, wary, yet somehow, beneath the pain, sensing that the rules of her world had shifted ever so slightly. Could anyone ever truly see her? Was it possible that dignity, once stripped away, could be reclaimed? That night, hope and uncertainty warred inside both Lucia and Javier as they returned to their separate lives. Neither knew it yet, but the collision of their worlds had already set destiny in motion. What would you have done if you were in Lucia's place? Have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own story? Share your thoughts below. The hardest conversations are often the ones that change everything. As dawn broke, new questions and old wounds lingered, ripe for confrontation, for justice, and for the possibility of redemption. The next chapter would begin with action. And neither Lucia nor Javier would ever be the same. Javier's office felt colder than usual that morning, the city's chaos muffled behind thick glass. But even the walls of his empire could not keep out the memory of Lucia's trembling voice. As he scrolled through reports, numbers blurred in front of his eyes, profits, projections, graphs, all meaningless next to the searing image of a woman whose dignity had been ground down in his name. He found himself staring at the roster of cleaning staff, searching for stories behind the names, for the first time noticing the minute entries, overtime hours, shift swaps, minimal sick days. Invisible people holding up a visible world. The shame that gripped him was as unfamiliar as it was relentless. He called Roberto, his trusted HR director, asking questions sharper than usual. What protocols exist to protect contract workers? How are complaints really handled? He listened not as a boss, but as an accused. Downstairs, Lucia scrubbed the marble floors, the ache in her arms overshadowed by the dread twisting in her gut. Each new footstep in the corridor sent her mind spiraling. Had she spoken out of turn last night? Would there be consequences for revealing the truth? Betrayal stung, not only from Ruiz's cruelty, but from the world's indifference, and now from her own fear of hope. Every colleague's glance felt loaded, every whispered conversation a possible warning. The possibility of change glittered in her chest like a secret, both dangerous and exhilarating. Later, summoned to the 50th floor, the seat of power she'd only glimpsed from afar, Lucia's breath caught. Polished floors. Scent of expensive cologne. Receptionists with tight smiles. Nothing in her 5 years of invisible labor prepared her for this. When Javier greeted her, he did not stand behind his desk, but met her at the door, eyes soft but intent. "Thank you for coming, Lucia. What happened yesterday was wrong. It wasn't just an isolated act, it was a symptom of something deeper. I should have seen it sooner." The tension in the room was palpable, a clash between the old order and the fragile promise of something different. Lucia's instinct was to deflect, to make herself small, to say it didn't matter. Yet Javier's gaze pinned her there, waiting, almost as if her voice now mattered most. Voice trembling, she recounted the truth in careful detail, the spilled coffee, the laughter, the shame, the years of small slights and large humiliations. Javier listened, the lines of command on his face deepening with each word. He admitted his fault, that the culture of silence and disregard was built, layer by layer, atop every boardroom win, every bonus, every overlooked abuse. The empire's gleaming reputation stood upon the fatigue and humiliation of people like Lucia. Action, for once, came not in the form of orders barked or deals struck, but in quiet, grounded resolve. Javier assembled department heads and HR, demanding an audit of working conditions, not just for legal compliance, but for human dignity. He insisted on hearing other workers' stories, a parade of confessions and tears that had long gone unheard. Lucia watched these changes unfold with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and reluctant pride. When Javier offered her a new role, labor well-being coordinator, it felt like stepping onto a ledge above a chasm. "Why me?" she asked, suspicion and hope battling behind her eyes. "Because you see what I cannot. Because you know the cost of invisibility," he replied. The gesture was brave, but fragile, and it threatened the comfort of those who thrived in silence. Word spread. Some celebrated. Secretly grateful, openly hopeful. Others, like Ruiz or Gabriela in PR, seethed, questioning Javier's motives, gossiping about Lucia's presumption. And still, beneath it all, pulsed the uneasy knowledge that changing the rules would require more than a new policy. It would require courage, from Javier, from Lucia, from everyone who had learned to survive on scraps of respect. As the day faded, and Javier lingered at his window watching the city hum below, while Lucia rode the bus home gripping the folder that held her future, both wondered, could broken trust ever be restored? Could one act of recognition ripple out to reform something greater? Yet, amid the ache and uncertainty, a seed of resolve grew within them both. For Lucia, the pain of betrayal was slowly giving way to the resolve of self-worth. For Javier, awareness had become a call to action no less urgent than any business crisis. But transformation was just beginning. Next would come Lucia's own confrontation with old doubts and new responsibilities, the hardest chapter yet, where the fear of not belonging warred against the hope of building a better world from within. Lucia stood before the elevator's mirrored doors, her new ID badge warm against her chest, yet the unfamiliar weight draped upon her shoulders was not just the tailored blazer. It was the burden of new expectations, and the silent challenge inscribed in every passing glance. 5 years of blending into wall shadows had trained her to be invisible. Now, every step into the executive floors made her hypervisible, her insecurities magnified beneath scrutinizing eyes. The first days were a whirlwind of procedures and policies. Roberto from HR was kind but brisk, drawing boxes on whiteboards, handing her thick binders emblazoned with the company's logo. "Remember, Lucia, you are the bridge. They trust you because you've lived both sides." Yet his words, however well-meaning, could not silence the chorus of doubts roaring in her mind. Could she truly do this, or would her past forever define and limit her? Old colleagues viewed her with mixed emotions. Some with pride and whispered encouragement in service hallways, others with envy or suspicion. Patricia, the former supervisor, icily dropped a clipboard on Lucia's new desk. "Not everyone thinks you deserve this. Just remember where you came from." The word stung, a reminder that climbing even a single rung meant risking losing touch with those below. Still, Lucia fought to prove, to others and to herself, that she belonged. She stayed late, learned corporate jargon by candlelight, her tired eyes scanning Excel sheets and regulations she'd never imagined would rule her days. Training sessions were an endurance test, faces in crisp suits, nodding with pity or with challenge, testing the outsider at every turn. Each mistake, a forgotten term, a misunderstood protocol, felt like a verdict. Inside, a war raged between her old self and the one she was forging. Gratefulness for the opportunity wrestled with a deep fear of exposure. Imposter syndrome crept in during quiet hours. Did Javier truly see her, or only the symbol she had become? Was she being tested, set up to fail behind the polished glass and polite half-smiles? Yet, resilience was stitched into her bones. Lucia found pockets of unexpected support. Claudia from reception slipped her notes with practical tips hidden between printouts. Even some janitors clapped her on the back when nobody was looking. During one tense meeting, her data-driven proposal for ergonomic cleaning equipment was dismissed by an executive, until an ally quietly backed her up, turning sarcasm into serious consideration. Small victories, but enough to kindle hope. Throughout, Javier kept his promise, offering guidance in moments of doubt, but holding back just enough to let her find her footing. One late evening, as she lingered in her office, he found her hunched over manuals, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You're allowed to struggle, Lucia. Strength isn't never falling, it's getting up, learning, and refusing to disappear." His words didn't erase her fear, but they gave it context, a signal that she did not have to surrender the most vital parts of herself in order to lead. Sometimes the pain and isolation felt unbearable. She missed the camaraderie of her cleaning crew, the simplicity of tasks that did not demand soul-searching. But each day she faced microaggressions or open resistance, she grew, not just tougher, but clearer-sighted. The anger at being underestimated hardened slowly into a quiet determination. She would not lead by mimicry, but by authenticity, forging a precedent for others who might one day rise. When the results of her first project, revised schedules and new safety gear, were implemented successfully, it was not just a policy win. It was validation for the silent story she carried, that those from the bottom knew more than anyone thought, and could build a better world if given the chance. As Lucia rode the elevator down that evening, her reflection showed a woman still battling uncertainty, but also someone transformed, wiser, stronger, and unmistakably seen. Ahead, the bright lights of a corporate gala awaited, a night promising both ceremony and confrontation. For Lucia, it would be the next trial, a stage where acceptance and self-worth would again be tested beneath chandeliers and whispered doubts. Her rise was not finished, the real test, of courage, of belonging, was about to begin. The hotel's golden foyer glittered with chandeliers and nervous anticipation as Lucia stepped out of the car, the midnight blue dress clinging to her uncertainty. Each step across the plush carpet felt weighted, her heels too new, her own reflection in the mirrored doors too foreign. The gala lay before her like a stage set for someone else's life, and she fought the urge to turn and run back out into the night. Inside, hushed laughter and the clinking of crystal marked the divisions she had crossed. Faces framed in jewels and pressed collars turned, curious, polite, scrutinizing. She felt stripped, laid bare under 1,000 unsaid words. Who is she? Why is she here? Javier met her just beyond the threshold, his smile warm but edged by his own nerves. "You're perfect," he whispered, and for a heartbeat, the world shrank to the safe circle of his hand curled gently at her waist. But safety was fleeting. Executives clustered nearby, their conversations pausing as they took in the unconventional guest on Javier's arm. The air thickened with rivalry and speculation. The MC's voice echoed from the ballroom, but Lucia's thoughts roared louder, every etiquette rule memorized, every faded memory of invisibility that seemed to shimmer again in the gold-lit crowd. Gabriella's eyes found hers across the room, unblinking and sharp, a silent reminder of every barrier Lucia still faced. Gabriella drifted over, perfectly poised, her words as smooth as silk and twice as cold. "Lucia, lovely dress. Didn't expect to see you here among the investors. Quite an adjustment, I imagine." The smile was brittle. Lucia managed a steady response, but the exchange left her exposed, a trespasser in a world designed to resist her presence. Dinner unfolded in a blur of forced politeness, interrupted by moments of hope. A tentative conversation with an executive's spouse, a quiet word of encouragement from the company's accountant, hands trembling slightly as she managed the correct fork. Amid the scrutiny, Lucia's greatest battle was within, her fight to refuse disappearance, to be more than a symbol propped beside the boss. The glances, the low murmurs, none cut so sharply as her own fear of falling short. She found shelter in a shadowed corner, gathering herself, longing for the ease of laughter shared in service hallways. Javier appeared at her side, listening without judgment as she gave voice to her doubts. They don't see me, not really. Only who they fear I might become. He cupped her hands in his own. But I see you. And I'm proud to stand beside you, no matter who's watching. The orchestra began, and Javier led her onto the dance floor. The moment felt impossibly intimate. A hush amid the spectacle. He guided her gently, their movement an act of quiet defiance. For the first time that night, Lucia belonged. But adversity lingered at the edges, Gabriella's glare, the stilted applause. Javier called away to attend to donors, leaving Lucia alone in the sea of finery. She retreated to the terrace, bathed in city lights, drawing slow breaths. Strength flickered from within as she remembered the solidarity of the cleaning staff, the changes her efforts had sparked. Alone, Lucia confronted the sum of her struggle, the ache of not belonging, the pride of surviving, the newness of hope. It was here, under the open sky, that Javier found her again, sharing unguarded words about fear, about being outsiders even when you look like you're in charge. From inside the ballroom came new music and the low swell of conversation. Lucia straightened, the hard-won confidence of her journey settling across her shoulders like a mantle. She turned to face the crowd, neither apologetic nor defiant, resolved to take up her space. This was no longer someone else's story, it was hers. The corporate gala had stripped her, challenged her, but also carved a new sense of worth from old wounds. As she and Javier walked back inside, Lucia knew the greatest transformation would not come from acceptance by others, but from learning to stand in her own truth, regardless of where she was, or who was watching. The hotel lobby was ablaze with golden light, a manicured jungle of crystal chandeliers and nervous ambition. Lucia stepped from the black sedan, clutching a borrowed evening bag, the sleek fabric of her midnight dress feeling both armor and disguise. Every detail had been chosen for her, by people who believed the correct dress or the correct shoes might somehow slip her unnoticed into a world built to exclude her. But nothing disguised the tremor in her hands, or the riot of doubt in her heart. Inside, jaws tightened and voices hushed as she entered. Executives and donors, their laughter sharp as diamonds, tracked her with a blend of curiosity and brittle politeness. Who is she to walk beside Javier Saldivar? Is she a symbol, his project? His mistake? Eyes lingered, some with intrigue, others with a veiled hostility that stung worse than outright cruelty. Javier met her at the entrance of the ballroom, his arm a lifeline. You deserve to be here as much as anyone, he whispered, his voice meant for her alone. But even his protection could not mute the tremors of tension already threading through the night. Lucia could feel Gabriella's eyes cold and assessing from across the room, as if weighing her worth and finding her lacking before a single word. Gabriella approached, elegant, serene, puncturing Lucia's fragile confidence with a perfect smile. Your dress is lovely. You fit in, almost perfectly. The compliment was a blade, delicate and precise. Lucia smiled back, refusing to flinch, but inside, self-doubt gnawed. Dinner was a thicket of conversations Lucia barely understood, economics, mergers, world travel. She worried over every gesture and word, the rules invisible and unyielding. Javier, always nearby, offered subtle nods of encouragement. Yet each glance from Gabriella or the other executives pulled Lucia back to the sharp edge of her outsider status. The highlight, or ordeal, of the evening arrived, the dance. Soft music wafted across the ballroom, and Javier led her out, every step watched, every movement a test. For a few moments, fear and expectation fell away, the world contracted until there was only the warmth of his hand on her back, the steady rhythm of his breath. She felt seen, truly seen, yet the echo of ridicule and scrutiny lingered at the perimeter. Then, as the song ended, reality flooded in. Gabriella reappeared, looping her arm through Javier's, steering him away under the guise of introductions. Left on the dance floor, Lucia felt suddenly exposed, a spotlight on every doubt and insecurity. The applause felt distant and empty. Seeking refuge, Lucia slipped onto the balcony, the cool night air soothing her burning cheeks. Alone above the city, she remembered the camaraderie of simpler days, the defiant laughter shared with her cleaning crew. Against the sparkling skyline, she questioned, had her journey gained her anything real, or had she just traded one loneliness for another? Javier found her there, his composure peeled away with every vulnerable word they exchanged. I never knew how easy it was for people like me to ignore the pain of those who hold us up, he admitted, his guilt raw. Lucia let herself be honest, all my life, I've dreamed of being seen. Tonight I see myself most clearly in the places I thought I had left behind. Yet, somewhere between confession and resolve, Lucia felt something shift within her. Shame and fear no longer reigned, pride in her survival flickered strong. She returned to the ballroom, a small smile greeting the curious and hostile alike. She took her place at Javier's side, tentative, imperfect, but undeniably herself. The night closed with promises and uncertainty, but Lucia had changed. The walls that had kept her out had not crumbled, but her courage had found cracks in their foundation. Inside her, new determination began to grow, the resolve not just to survive, but to lead, to belong, and to reshape the world that had once deemed her invisible. And so, as the night faded and new challenges brewed just beyond the glitter and applause, Lucia stepped into the next chapter, no longer only an outsider, but a woman forging her own legacy, one brave choice at a time. The winds of change rarely blow without resistance. For Lucia, leadership was not the triumph the world imagined, it was a daily navigation of exposed nerves and stubborn old ways. Returning home from long days in her modest apartment, she would stare at the city lights and wonder if her influence, so hard-won, so fragile, would last beyond her own efforts. Inside the company, victories were often muted by undercurrents of skepticism. Her initiatives, better schedules, ergonomic equipment, new rest areas, were not only numbers to executives, but lifelines for dozens who had once stood in her shoes. Yet every success sparked new rounds of whispered accusations. Some said she had forgotten her place, others hinted that she was merely Javier's puppet, her advancements a facade masking invisible ceilings. The sting was sharpest from friends turned wary, like Patricia, now caught between memories of shared struggle and envy for the one who escaped. Meetings became battlegrounds. Lucia, prepared and resolute, faced boardroom resistance where old guard managers doubted the value of investment in worker dignity. She countered cold logic with hard-earned data, absenteeism cut in half, morale rising, minor injuries reduced. But in the silence after each presentation, she heard what was left unsaid. Would her progress vanish when she was gone? Was change more than her story? Amid accusations and alliances, Lucia clung to purpose. Her nights belonged to textbooks and class notes, as she struggled through the grind of night school. Doubt stalked her, was she still authentic, or just another suit? When exhaustion threatened, she remembered women on the morning bus, their voices rising above fatigue in jokes and songs. Restless hope kept her going, this work was more than her own ascent. It was a way to anchor change beyond herself. Perseverance yielded ripples. HR began citing her pilot program as a model. A janitor named Ernesto, once skeptical, thanked her quietly for making it possible to attend his daughter's graduation. The foundation she and Javier dreamed of together, once just a vision, became real, offering scholarships, emergency aid, and a glimmer of mobility for those long left out. And still, opposition flared. Gabriella, never an open enemy but always poised, lobbied against expanding Lucia's reach, warning that excess idealism might threaten company reputation. Lucia learned to give measured ground, but not to yield the battle. The hardest moments came when she doubted herself, feeling adrift between worlds, too ambitious for her old circle, too unpolished for her new one. Each time, Javier reminded her, quietly, without rescue, that systemic change required discomfort. "You can't mend a fabric without pulling some threads," he said gently one night as they looked out over the city, hands entwined. "You are not responsible for being beloved, only for doing what's right." It took time, small wins, and hundreds of unheard stories. But gradually, the culture shifted. Workers began to speak up for themselves, small gestures of respect became habit. Lucia saw it in how new hires were trained, in thank-you notes left in the break rooms, in the way eyes met hers. At last, with respect instead of avoidance. Occasionally, loneliness resurfaced, a cruel comment, another closed door. But Lucia, tested and transformed, faced each challenge as proof that the work mattered. Triumph, she learned, is never final, neither is loss. The true legacy was measured not in policies or perks but in the unseen dignity restored to lives quietly changed. As a new gala approached, this time with Lucia at the planning helm, she braced herself for inevitable doubts, external and internal. But she also sensed a profound shift, the slow turning of an institution toward the light. Change, she realized, is never owned by one person. In the end, it spreads, multiplies, and survives in the courage of those bold enough to begin. The next chapter would embrace even bigger dreams, family, legacy, and a world where invisibility gradually gives way to recognition. Lucia was no longer just building a place for herself. She was making a space for everyone who dared to hope for more. Spring sunlight spilled through the wide windows of Javier and Lucia's apartment, painting soft gold onto the walls that now echoed with laughter, a child's, bright and boundless. In the center of the living room, Lucia knelt to tie tiny shoelaces, her heart thumping with disbelief at how far she'd come, from lonely bus rides in darkness to this, belonging, love, a family she'd once only imagined from afar. Their daughter, Sophia, wore her father's eyes, searching, curious, and unyielding. She paused mid-twirl and exclaimed, "Mama, look at me." That cry, so simple, pierced through every old wound, a daily miracle, "I am seen." Yet beneath the everyday joys, Lucia was haunted by memories that still surfaced like bruises, the laughter behind her back, Patricia's cool withdrawal, nights when she believed happiness was for other people. A chill seeped in as she watched Javier at the window, phone pressed to his ear, his words crisp with the weight of business and reputation. No matter how much they had built together, their world sometimes tugged them apart, by habit, by expectation, by the old suspicion that her place here was conditional, still being tested. The day of the Foundation's third anniversary celebration brought every emotion to a boil. Their home filled with people. Friends, former rivals, family members wary and proud. Lucia caught fragments of conversation. "She's changed everything," whispered with awe, "she's still an outsider at heart," with skepticism. At dinner, Javier rose to speak, his voice unexpectedly raw. "When I first met Lucia, my world was built on pride and distance. She taught me the courage of humility. Today, our family, our work, is about making sure no one loses their dignity just to survive." He met her gaze across the table. A lifeline that stilled her trembling hands. But even this moment was shaken by shadows, a cousin's snide joke about fairy tale endings, Gabriella's cool congratulations over dessert, a neighbor's grumble that too much change could be dangerous. Lucia stood at the kitchen sink afterward, her reflection blurred by tears of rage and fatigue. Old truths gnawed at her, betrayal from those she yearned to impress, pain that success could not erase. Still, she remembered the night she'd accepted Javier's hand, her vow to herself, to never let fear or doubt be the end of her story. Later, on the quiet balcony, she found Javier rocking Sophia under a navy sky. He drew Lucia into his arms, and for a moment, the city's noise faded, leaving only the intimate rhythm of breath, of trust rebuilt day by day. Do you regret it? She whispered, asking everything and nothing. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Every wound brought us here. Love grew from what we survived, not what came easy. Their eyes met, two fighters, scarred and grateful, having forged a new world from old fractures. Legacy, Javier murmured, isn't a building or a fund. It's her. He nodded toward their sleeping daughter. And it's every story we dare to tell that was never supposed to be told. As dawn approached, Lucia's heart quieted. She thought of the women still cleaning silent offices, the children on distant buses. Gazing at Sophia, she promised, you'll never have to choose between being seen and being true. Her legacy was this, transforming pain into hope, never forgetting the invisible so no one else would have to bear that shadow alone. Has your own legacy been forged from moments of pain, or from choices to risk love over certainty? If you could write your family's next chapter, what would it say? Share your dream of belonging, of being seen, below. Because every story, no matter where it begins, deserves to find its light. And somewhere in the hush before sunrise, Lucia understood, her story had not ended at victory, but had only begun at forgiveness. Tomorrow, she would rise again, a mother, a leader, a survivor, and above all, finally, herself. How did Lucia's journey make you feel? Have you ever faced moments where you had to fight to be seen, or stood up for what's right even when it was difficult? Share your own story below, or let us know which part of Lucia and Javier's journey touched you the most. If you believe in the power of dignity, resilience, and hope, leave a comment, like, or share this video with someone who needs to know they're not invisible. Your voice could inspire the next chapter in someone else's story. What would you do if you were Lucia, or Javier? Let's talk in the comments.